Greetings and good vibes, everybody. I am Erika Christie, and I am back for another of my fireside chats, little Q&A. This will be the second one that I'm doing. Hopefully the first one was fun and everybody enjoyed it. I enjoyed it, so I'm going to do at least a couple more of them. As I said, I get quite a few Q&A questions come in just because I don't talk a whole lot about my background personally while I'm doing interviews, because I like hearing the guests speak as much as possible. So I do want to get through a couple more of these Q&A questions because I do find them fun to answer and I am enjoying myself. So let's jump right in, see what our first question is. What are some effective techniques for directing children who are naturally shy or introverted? I actually don't have a lot of experience with this because when I'm doing children's theater, normally the children that are there are super, super high energy and they really want to be there. So I did teach at a theater for 2 years, and there were a few kids who weren't quite as excited about it, possibly kind of pushed into it a little bit by their parents just because they wanted them to be a little bit more outgoing, experience something they hadn't done before. So I have worked with a few who are a little bit more shy. What I would say is you really have to make them feel as comfortable as quickly as possible. And that means comfortable in the space, make sure they're comfortable with the stage, walking around, comfortable with the sets, with the props, comfortable with the other kids. Also comfortable if you're using vocabulary or terms that they're not familiar with. You don't want them to be turned off and just stop listening because you're saying words they don't understand. So, and that's for, really for all the kids. As you're explaining stuff, make sure they really understand what's going on. They're not feeling like they're being excluded because they don't understand the terms you're using. That could be downstage, upstage, props. I mean, if you're 8 years old, you might not know what the word props are. So just really making sure they know what's going on. No big surprises. Don't just drop them into things and assume that they can deal with it. Adults who love doing improv, they love it. You just drop them into something, give them no warning, and then just make them go. Kids, especially if they're a little bit nervous, you don't want to do that at all. You want to make sure they know what's going on, they're comfortable, they're happy about everything that's happening. And really more than anything, at least for me, is I really want to make sure that they're focusing on the other person. So they're looking at them, they ask a question, they're literally looking at the person that they're asking the question to, and they're waiting for the response. So really just getting them comfortable, don't surprise them, make sure they're having fun. If everybody's a little bit antsy, go ahead and give it a 10-minute break, let them run around, let them yell, scream, jump around, let them get that little bit of energy out, then they'll go back to focusing a little bit better. So I would say that's kind of what I did with the kids that needed maybe just a little bit more of a shove into the, outward excitability that some of the other kids already had. What's a skill you have lost that you wish you still had? That's how much time do we have? Let's go with, I would say one that I was thinking about a bit more recently would be the ability to memorize music almost instantly. When I was younger, I would say I started playing drums at the age of 10 or 11. I was pretty young when I started, and I absolutely loved it. And by the time I was moved up all the way through into high school, I was doing everything. I mean, jazz band, pep band, marching band, orchestras. Uh, I was in a few different bands outside of school. Like I was in a band at church, and we did everything from, kind of contemporary Christian type music all the way over to rock music and blues. And then that's also the first place where I started playing what we'd refer to as oldies. First time I played Buddy Holly and, Andrew Sisters and the whole like Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy and that sort of thing. Like that was really my first experience into all those different genres, which I wasn't really familiar with. Anyways, I would say marching band was the specific thing that got me to the point where when you're doing it so much that I know there was one time they needed us to march in some kind of parade that was coming up, but we absolutely couldn't use our music, and we didn't find out until the absolute last second. So it was one entire song, 3.5, 4 minutes, and I memorized it in less than 10 minutes. Whole thing, whole song from beginning to end, playing the entire time. There weren't any big rests in it, and just literally being able to memorize entire songs in minutes. That was a skill that I had. I did brag about it a little bit. I was a teenager, so I mean, I kind of had to. Yeah, I would say that was probably it. And that sort of thing really was pointed out to me a lot when I was doing my undergrad because I took a few different dance classes. I'm terrible at dance. I don't like doing it. I just did it because I'm a director and I wanted to have more. I just wanted to gain an experience of what it's like being in dance classes. And some of those classes, like especially people who have been doing dance for their entire lives, and at this point, now in their late teens, early 20s, we would do sequences and they would just nail them perfectly the first time. And I couldn't even figure out what was going on. And it's because each separate little element of the dance, they had so much experience. They had so many things to draw from in their own memory. So many times they had done those movements in other pieces that when you just rearrange them around a little bit and do them in a different order for whatever we were doing in class, it was so easy for them to do. I, of course, had no idea what was going on. And for me, it had this, it was reminiscent of that feeling of being in band and, especially being a drummer. Didn't matter if I was playing snare drum, I could have been playing the quads, could be playing the bass drum, could be playing marimbas. Instrument didn't really matter. It's once you're playing music so much every single day that you start seeing all the different sequences that happen between different songs, and you're able to rearrange them and put them together, memorize them, remember them. You're not struggling to do them, and you can memorize things really, really quickly. So yeah, I would say if I could still do that, I would really enjoy that. I can still sight read quite well without making many mistakes at all, but I can't memorize like entire songs in the same way that I used to be able to. All right. What is the importance of a strong opening scene? I am a huge, huge fan of big, extravagant, outrageous things right from the beginning. And I also like to start projects, doesn't matter what it is. Screenplays, stage plays, audio dramas, comic books, like everything that I work on, I like whatever the first image. I want that first image to be memorable. Like I want it to really punch you in the face. I don't like subtle. I want it to be big and bold. And I would say one of the comic books that I'm working on, it's actually not big and bold, but it is reminiscent of something else. And it's a bit of a joke, at least for myself, for any of the fans out there of the original Star Trek is Kirk and the apple. So I start one of my comic books with a character eating a gigantic cheeseburger, and the cheeseburger is falling apart and it's slimy and it's falling down onto their clothing and it's all over the floor. And that's literally how I start the story, is with that character eating the giant cheeseburger. And it was a bit of an homage to Kirk with the apple. So that's the very first scene. And then immediately after that, they're on a spaceship. The spaceship is almost destroyed. So it's just right in your face, no pausing, no hesitating. I really like a strong opening scene, and specifically a strong opening image. I think it sets the story up in a way, and specifically in the way that you want it to be. So whatever way your story goes, start it that way from the very beginning. Don't there is an argument to be made to kind of, ease people into the story. I'm not one of those people. I'd rather punch you in the face at the beginning of the story. So that's just me though. So yeah. How do you decide which elements to leave in and take out of your script? It's uh it's a how do I want to go with that? Let's say you really it's a cliche, but you just leave in the best bits and you take out the other bits. That's really what it is. Um, Anything that doesn't serve the story, you just need to get rid of. That could be characters, that could be plot, that could be scenes, that could be settings. The hardest part is when you have a scene you really, really love, or a character you really, really love, and you know that they're just not helping the story. They're not moving along the plots. They're not really helping with anything. They're just this little funny thing that you have because you have some kind of personal connection to something and you really just kind of want it in the script. If it's not helping the story, it just needs to go. Because unlike previous centuries where there are plenty of books out there where the writers were paid by the word. And that's when you get sometimes very good books, but they're just bloated because the writer knows they're being paid by the word. That's not the world that we're in now. It's the exact opposite now. Is you have limited time, people have limited attention spans, limited time to give to stuff. If you're filling up story with all the stuff that doesn't go anywhere, you're just going to frustrate people and they're not going to listen. So it has to advance the story, it has to advance the plot, it has to be something interesting that the characters are getting into, some interesting information that, you're learning about them, about the story, about, the set, any of that stuff. If it's helping the story, keep it in. If it's just this funny thing that you're trying to throw in, it's unless it becomes important later on, you kind of have to get rid of it. Yeah. That's sort of my non-answer. There you go. What project management tools do you use? I use a few of them, but I would say Asana is probably my favorite. I was first introduced to it, yeah, I would at least 6, 7 years ago. Like it's been quite some time. And it wasn't until it was a big comic book project I started working on at least 4 or 5 years ago. It wasn't until then that I really like jumped into it hardcore. And that's because I was directing it, I was producing it, and I was the head writer on it. And I knew that I was going to have, the co-producer and I were working on stuff. I knew we were going to have a bunch of different artists, which was the biggest issue, was that was going to have a bunch of different people creating, creating characters, doing sketches, helping with the art Bible, and then actually working on the project itself. And then eventually I was going to have inkers and I was going to have colorers, and there was going to be a couple of, different writers that would come in and help with stuff. And then using all of that stuff, especially background stuff, and making social media content. And it quickly became obvious that the project was getting big, and that I was really going to need to be able to have a good handle on all of the people that were helping. And that just seemed like the easiest way to go, because the thing, and I'm in no way affiliated with Asana, like no way at all. But being able to set stuff up on schedules and have due dates, and specifically being able to set stuff in order. One person writes something, one person does the initial sketch, another person maybe finalizes it, then the next person needs to ink something, and then it goes to the colorer, and then it goes on, et cetera, et cetera. when one person's task is dependent on the person prior to them finishing their task first, that's what Asana is the best for. Is once that person is done, you can set it up that it can then send the information to the next person. So you are not manually going through every single time something is finished and trying to set it on to the next person. You could just set all of that stuff up. So when stuff is going out in sequences, it's just automatically being sent to the right person. And then again, the due dates, setting the due dates, following the due dates, changing the due dates. It's really easy to see when something was due 3 days ago and it's not done. It's literally bright red on the screen. So like you don't even have to go searching for it. You can just tell that, something was missed, and it's easy to find it, tag that person, send them a note, whatever it is that you need to inform them. Oh, hey, I need to make sure that this gets done. So for me, and that was a comic book, but I use that for my film projects. I use that for a lot of the workshops I work on in panels and social media content and podcasts, everything. Like I use Asana for absolutely everything. So yeah, that is very much my recommendation. How did you get into multicam directing? I did theater directing as my undergrad. So my first advanced degree I got was literally in directing. And while I was at theater school is when I started working on some short films. I think I was the assistant director on the first short film I ever worked on. And it was, oh, what was it? It must have been a 16 millimeter. I'm trying to think what it was. It had to have been 16 millimeter short film that we did actually on film, wasn't digital. And it was a lot of fun. And I thought, wow, this is kind of exciting to get into this. And I always, because I had such a heavy theater background, I always look at film and video as a version of theater, which I think most people probably don't. But I know that on most films that like for television, you've got single camera shows and you have multi-camera shows. Generally speaking, a lot of the multi-camera shows are done quicker because you've got multiple cameras up. So the sets aren't as complicated. The lights aren't as complicated. You do them almost more like plays because you're filming multiple things at the same time. And then for anything that's like, I don't want to say higher quality because that's not quite where I'm going with that. But for anything that's single camera, it's a single setup. So all the lighting has changed, the scenery has changed. This it takes much longer. And so they have a very, very different look to them, single cam versus multicam in the television world. But because I come from theater, I like being able to capture what's going on from multiple angles at the same time. So even when I'm doing short films, like any moments where I can do two cameras, I like setting it up as if it's a single camera, shoot, but I like having two, occasionally even three cameras when I can, because it makes it easier in the edits when you're not trying to match when one person is holding something in their right hand and then the second time they did it, they were holding it in their left hand. And, the script supervisor didn't realize the mistake and the actor didn't realize the mistake. So I really like the ability to be able to film multiple different angles at the same time. I think it's a little bit more prep work you have to do, but it makes it a little bit easier in the edits. And so that sort of thinking translated to when I came to Atlanta and I started working on a lot more comedy stuff, whether it's stand-up, improv, different kind of variety shows. Being able to do multicam is just so much easier because you've got all the different things to choose from. You have your screen set up. I use ATEM equipment, so I can have as many as 8 cameras plugged in at the same time, or 6 cameras in 2 different computers if we're doing slides, we're playing videos or anything like that. So lots of cameras and just being able to see everything at the same time, calling cues, talking to the camera operators, giving them directions, talking to the person who's sitting actually at the stream deck, who's switching back and forth between all the different views. Like that came very, very naturally to me. And also just working on interviews, especially these last like 10, 15 years. Anytime I'm doing an interview, always want at least 2 cameras. I would prefer 3, sometimes even 4. So just knowing what are the best angles, what's the best lighting, what's the, just you want the person that you're interviewing to look great. You want them to look like they know what they're talking about. You want it to be, professional setting. You really want them to be able to shine in the interview. So having multiple cameras and being able to switch back and forth between the different views, I think just makes everything look better. So how did I get into it? Theater, interviews, comedy. I just sort of did it without a little bit of going onto YouTube to kind of just get a little bit of an idea, especially as far as like calling cues, making sure that I was talking to the camera operators correctly. But really, I just started doing it. I was like, yeah, I could do it, and I just sort of did it. Like I didn't let myself get too caught up in the details of it. I was like, yep, I can do it. I've got a lot of directing experience. I do a lot of camera operating. I do a lot of photography. I know what I'm doing. I just need to learn how to do all these things at the same time, and I just jumped into it. It seemed the best way to go. What do you like most about working as a script consultant? I love coming up with stories. I love writing treatments. I like coming up with the ideas. I like plotting things, whether that's comic books or video ideas or something in the audio format. I love being able to figure out what's the long-term storyline, where's this going across different seasons or series, across different platforms. I love coming up with all of that. I do not like sitting down and writing scripts like page by page by page. I get tired of it. I get frustrated with it. I'm actually very fast at it. Like I've chugged out 20, 30-page scripts in, a day or two. Like I can do it very quickly, but I don't like getting caught up in the minutia. I like coming up with the story. I like writing treatments. I once sat down and wrote like a 79-page treatment for something and handed it to somebody else and said, please start writing the screenplay for this because I don't have the patience. So I'm good at it, but I don't like it. So being a script consultant or a script doctor or, just assisting people with their screenplays, I like that so much because I get to do all of the things that I like, but I am not the one who has to sit down and literally line by line by line by line write the entire screenplay because I lose my patience with it. Although I do end up doing it quite a lot. I would much prefer coming up with the idea, laying it all out, writing a treatment, writing summaries. I mean, I could write, you know, a 30, 40, 50-page treatment that's only a 10-page script because I'll put all of the extra information in there. I just get bored and I don't want to write the actual screenplay. So yeah, I love working as a script consultant or a script doctor, talking to people about their stories, helping them with structure, helping them with plot, with characters, with dialogue, with action, getting to work on all of that. I just love as long as I'm not the one who has to do it. That's that's really about it. All right. What is a time you were over your head on a project? Hmm. I mean, I've worked on so many projects and I'm pretty good with just going with the flow. Oh yeah, that's a good one. When number of years ago, I was working with, which I think I mentioned in the last Q&A, I was working with Marines and we were doing projects. We were doing world record stuff on jet skis. And so, yeah, jet skis, boats in and out of marinas, up and down the East Coast. It was a pretty big project. And we were slowly building up momentum on the project. We were getting more interviews. We were getting more television coverage. We were doing bigger and longer rides. The team was slowly growing. We were doing a lot of stuff in New York, in and out of hospitals, talking to different wounded veterans, getting people pumped up. And there were moments where I'd have like little mini panic moments where, something would happen. I'd be like, oh, I don't know if I'm qualified to do this. But, you just always push ahead, always learning, always asking questions. I was in Washington, D.C. at the time, and there's a lot of different production companies and like headquarters for different shows. Like Discovery is based there, and a lot of different things were all based there. And we did actually have a couple meetings with Discovery. We had reached out to Red Bull a couple of times, so all of that stuff was just very much a learning process. But I would say we were contacted, or we were somehow put in touch with one of the local broadcast channels. I want to say that it was Cox, but I could be wrong about that. And we went into the meeting, and we had been having a lot of meetings with production companies because I was the only media person on the team, and I was getting as much content as I could with as many cameras and microphones, and doing interviews and filming, putting cameras on jet skis and putting cameras on boats and filming as much as we could. But if we were really going to kind of take this to the next level, we really needed a full production crew. So we had been interviewing with lots of different production companies, seeing if we could get one of them interested. And we were going to use the production company to help get us distribution. Well, we had this meeting, I think it was with Cox, for one of the local, for like that region, somewhere vaguely in the DC/Northern Virginia area. We went into the meeting, and I was like, this will be kind of similar to a lot of the other meetings we've been having, and it ended up not being. And I was way over my head trying to follow what was going on. Essentially, we were being offered for free, because we were working with wounded veterans, and they really liked what we were doing. They were offering us a free slot. I think it was 30 minutes every week for a certain amount of time, that they were giving us that slot, and we could sell ads inside that slot. We could sell our own ads, and we would make any money, whatever we would got from the ads. And that's what we were offered. That's what we were being offered. Because it fit perfectly in some of the different like initiatives that the channel was trying to do. So they were going to offer us, as being like as I said, a group of wounded veterans. They were offering us that time slot that we could do with what we wanted. And it was the concept that I was still trying to catch on to. And I was really struggling to kind of come to terms with it. And in the end, we ended up having to turn it down, because at that time we still hadn't found a production company. We absolutely had to have the production company in order to get 30 minutes or 24 minutes, 26 minutes, 28 minutes, however we wanted to arrange that. We needed to have 20 something minutes, let's say 24 broadcast quality minutes completed every single week. And then we also needed somebody who was helping us sell the advertisements to pay back the production company. And we could not put it together in time to be able to come back and say yes. But all of this stuff was new to us. None of us knew what we were doing. We still didn't have a production company, and we ended up having to turn it down. But the whole process of just trying to figure out what it was that they were saying, figuring out what we could and could not do, totally and completely over my head. Like, I had a long media background at that point, but not a broadcast understanding of what was needed to be done. So in that case, totally over my head, had no idea what was going on. We were just sort of fumbling along, and I think we spent like a month or two trying to put together all the pieces and realize that it was just a step too far for where we were at that time, without someone being able to put in a lot of money, or without a confirmed production company. It was just something that we couldn't do. And as I said, as I didn't know enough about what was going on at the time to like really give us a good step forward, to give good recommendations. Like, it was over all of our heads, but I was the media person, so it was very much over my head. Yeah. But we did continue with the project. Did you design your podcast logo and artwork yourself, or hire a designer? A little bit of both. I do a lot of graphic design. I do a lot of stuff in Photoshop, put together a lot of pitch decks. I am not good at logos, and I don't like doing logos. So any point in time that I can hand off logo design to somebody else, I will, because I hate doing it. So yes, I've done it. Yes, I do it a little bit, but I don't like doing it. And any time I can squirm out of it, I'm going to squirm out of it. Other stuff, other artwork, other graphic design, I do quite a lot of. Logos, Yeah, I've done a few and they're never very good. So I avoid it as much as possible because I don't like seeing it. I don't like doing it. I don't like embarrassing myself. So yeah, I get out of it whenever I can. I'd much prefer to hire a designer. How do you deal with awkward interview subjects? Hmm. That would depend on awkward in which way. Because there's some people who just panic when they're in front of a camera, they get really quiet, you can't get them to relax, they have a little bit of a deer in the headlights, they just give monosyllabic answers. That's one kind of awkward. There's other people who can't stop moving. I think my camera is moving right now. People who are doing this sort of thing and they can't sit still and they're waving their hands around, like, that's a completely different kind of awkward. It Awkward depends on a few things. I would say I'll take this in the sense of somebody who's a little uncomfortable, and I'm very particular about when I point out people's weird tics to them. We'll take this in that direction. Especially, like, I occasionally say ums, which are annoying. My big word is "so." If I have a weird pause, I'll go, "So," and it's a thing that I try to stop myself from doing. Different people have different, like, little words that they throw in. Most of the time it's, but it's not always. It's just weird little vocal things people do when they're thinking. It's just sort of taking up time. Sometimes if you point that out to people, it actually makes it worse. Like, they start to panic. They're trying not to say, they're trying not to say "so," they're trying not to say, and if you tell them that, they'll actually get worse about it, and the more frantic they get, and the more uncomfortable they get, the more that they say it. Other people, if you say that, they'll take it in and they'll pause a little bit more and they'll kind of stop saying the word. Really depends on the person, depends on how well you know them, depends on how much time they've been in front of a camera, and it depends on if they're just sort of free forming their answers or if they're reading a teleprompter or if it's somewhere in between, they're reading up bullet points. You have to it's difficult to find the balance between trying to get them to stop doing the thing that you want them to stop doing, whether that's using their hands too much, whether that's saying some weird word. If they're supposed to be looking at the camera and they're kind of doing this sort of thing, that you're gonna have to stop and go, I will need you to look at the camera." So there are things that you have to not let them get away with. There's other things that you have to be more careful with, especially with the weird, verbal diarrhea, like me doing the ums and the so's all the time. Eh, Patience, patience, and knowing if it's a small thing and pointing it out is going to make it worse, then just let it go. Because if you point it out and it gets worse, you've gotten yourself nowhere. I think that's where I'll go with that one. What is the most difficult video shoot you have put together? Yeah, I would have to say one of the jet ski trips, because that was difficult in the, because of just how massive it was. We did one particular trip where we went from I'm trying to remember if it was New York or DC, in a car. They're only a couple hours apart for anybody who doesn't know that. They're pretty close to each other. I think it no, I think our plan was New York, but I think we started in DC. So we went from DC all the way down the coast, all the way down to Miami. So I would say that was probably the biggest trip that we did, and it was just the logistics of that. Cameras, jet skis, boats, follow vehicles, fuel stops, hotel, food, setting up media stops along the way with local TV stations, keeping people updated, doing the social media, navigating the actual water itself, like with the GPS and making sure that the skiers knew where it was that they were supposed to go. How many forks do you come into when you're on the intracoastal waterway? How many forks do you come to? Which ones do you take a left at? Which ones do you take a right at? Navigating. We'll have to go to how many times have I been stopped by the police while filming? We'll go into that in a different discussion. How to navigate on a jet ski past a naval base and not get stopped by the police. I would say that that, placing cameras, charging cameras, getting the footage back, editing everything all together, like, that from beginning to end, checklists, putting together checklists, keeping everything. I mean, a laminator is my best friend during that whole trip, keeping everything that, dry, like, you just physically can't do things with paper if you're literally in the water. Uh, I would definitely say that is probably the most complicated, the most difficult, the most time-consuming shoots, to put together was some of our as our shoots and our trips were getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and a lot of that really was just navigating the water, navigating the follow vehicles, and dealing with, local TV stations and media stops and that sort of thing. It was big, it was complicated, it was a lot of fun, and it was frequently cold because we, for some stupid reason, kept taking our jet skis out when it was snowing. But I mean, that's our fault for being idiots, uh, or just being with Marines and they think that whole thing is fun. So, All right. Thank you so much. That was another fun conversation. I answered quite a few different questions. We'll do this at least a couple more times, see how these go. If you have any questions for me, feel free to leave them on the video down below. You can also contact the creator